Hi, everybody. Today I'm here with Catherine Brown, and Catherine is the author of How Good Humans Sell, and she's the founder of the Good Humans Growth Network. So, Catherine, I'm so excited to have you here with me. Thank you.
Thank you. I love what you're doing to help people bring their books and courses and other content to the world. So it's my pleasure.
So, I think when you and I first started working together, it was when you were working on your book. So, tell me more about that. What inspired you to write the book?
Yes. So I have since evolved my business in another direction, which we'll probably get to later because the book has become a part of that, part of naming, a tool I use inside it, etc. But if I look back at 2019, 2020, I was full-time working as a business to business sales trainer. I was self-employed. I had developed a set of curriculum that I was using that I felt like was different than other things on the market. When I first decided that I wanted to, I'd previously worked with doing other kinds of sales consulting. And when I decided I wanted to do sales training, I looked at all the franchises you can purchase and I looked at all the different options. And I just didn't see anything that captured kind of the spirit, the tone, the psychology of selling, different things that were important to me. And so I began creating lessons. And then what happened is COVID hit, and I had been debating about whether those lessons needed to be captured in another kind of form that was simpler because the lessons were kind of all over the place, and I would pick them apart in my Google Drive to put together a presentation to take to a company, but I didn't really have it codified anywhere. And so I thought, well, we're at home. Maybe this is my opportunity to think about this thing, which had become a little bit of a bucket list idea in my mind at that point. So I kind of seized the opportunity when I had a bunch of things canceled.
Yeah, a good use of that time, I would say, knowing what I know about how the book is done. But what was easy or what was super hard about that process for you?
Thanks, Elaine. So Um, that is such a good question, and I have been thinking about this, but I'm trying to keep it short because there's so many lessons. If I had to summarize them, I would say that even though I thought I knew why I wanted a book, I didn't really know to what end I would use it. And I think that matters for people. And I think you can have multiple reasons tied up in it, but I think people can't help you and you can't use it as a tool in your growth the way you might think you will if you don't know those reasons. So, an example, couple examples are what was not easy in the beginning was that I had a rough start because, to be fair to the ghostwriter, who, so the audience knows it wasn't Elaine, it was somebody else that I had met first. I met somebody that was in my entrepreneurial circles, and I'd heard that she was a ghostwriter. And I knew I wanted to write most of it myself, but I thought, well, maybe she can help me get started. And to be fair, I mean, I think this person probably asked all these questions, but I just didn't have clarity in my mind. Is this a textbook I'm going to use in my courses? Is it a marketing lead generator? Is it both? Is my goal actually to transition post-COVID to become a keynote speaker? So it's going to be a book that's put in every chair. I think that how long it is, how you go to market with it afterwards, all those answers depends on that. So one thing that was harder than I expected was deciding those things. Like, it's kind of like a coaching question, like, what do you really want out of this? And so I had some fits and starts because part of what we did was interview me, and then she reviewed a bunch of different materials to help me come up with a table of contents. And we ended up moving things around a lot. And I was probably frustrating for her in the beginning because I wasn't trying to be frustrating. I just wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to use it for. And so I changed my mind a lot in the beginning until I finally settled on a form. And once we agreed on the table of contents, it's kind of off to the races.
Yeah. And you got it done. You pushed it across the finish line and you took it to a conference.
I did. So thank you for that reminder. One of the things that helped was that there was a sales conference that was coming up that I knew a bunch of self-published other trainers were going to be there. And even though I was on a sponsor with the booth, I wanted to be able to walk around, mingle with them, and just know I had it done. I wanted the the press on LinkedIn to already be out. I wanted to have some kind of a virtual launch party. I wanted to be on the other side of that. So that helps so much. I would say having a real deadline that's driven by something like that for a busy person, that was a win. That was something I would advise anyone to do. You need to create a deadline. You need to book a place for your party, whatever the reason is, even if you have to manufacture it. That really helped. And so back to that question of what was easy and what was hard, having a deadline made it easier because it helped me prioritize things, and having a table of contents you really love made it easier. One of the surprises for me, Elaine, was that when I got the first person I worked with, when I got their writing, I ended up changing a lot of things. And at that point, I started to hit my stride because I kind of found my own voice, and I started to get clarity. It was almost like I needed to see a skeleton on the page. And when I saw the skeleton in the form, I was like, oh, I can do this. I can fill this in. And so I ended up actually using very little beyond the table of contents of what I originally paid for someone to help me get started with. But I don't really regret that because I'm not sure I could have gotten off the dime without some help, because it felt a little bit of an overwhelming task to me because of my lack of clarity.
Yeah, by the time you and I started to work together on it, you had your voice was nailed down. You knew what you wanted out of the book, and all we had to do was kind of do the edits and then do the production and get it into Amazon. So we got to do the fun part.
We did well, and Elaine would go through it. So for the audience listening, I mean, Elaine would go through and say, "You need another illustration here," or "I don't think this makes this point as clear as it could." I mean, she was really helping me just bring more stories to life inside of it. Remember, at that point, I had decided I wanted to use it as part of my teaching. So
Yeah.
it had a lot of bullets. It had a lot of content that was sort of hardcore, and we needed to bring it to life with more illustrations of real client testimony. So I'd have to sit there and think, okay, I don't want to tell this person's deep, dark secret about this sales problem they had, but so I'll change the names. But how can I basically tell this real life story of something that happened with a client I worked with and share their before and after transformation so that it illustrates the point I'm making? So you really helped
Yeah.
me bring color to that, as well as the copy editing and bringing it over the finish line. Another thing that a lot of people probably don't know you do is, I mean, you can set up the project plan and the agenda and just keep people on task. And again, if you are an entrepreneur that likes to stay too busy, or you travel a lot, or you don't have a deadline you've imposed, you can drag this thing out as long as you want it to take. And I don't advise that. There's definitely things I've learned about how I'll do it differently next time, and learn from some of those things about myself the first time.
I do think that's hard for a lot of people, is not having a solid plan. And if you haven't published before, you don't know what all those steps are. But
Mhm.
if we have a good checklist that we guide you, week by week through the process so that we know we hit the deadline and it's ready for that next conference, then it's a whole lot easier. So I think just understanding what all those steps are helps a lot when somebody starts out on a new book project.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
other thing I would say, Elaine, that's just changed about me as a person so much over the last few years is that I've started to understand that the entrepreneurs that I admire the most, I'm talking about major influencers, famous authors, things like that. What I've come to understand as I've followed them and read their material closely and listened to their podcast interviews is that people who get big things done, like books, they have a different view about manager time and maker time. Alex Hormozy, as an example, he talks about this. He talks about how you really don't want to have a day that is a manager's day, and a maker's day. And he would differentiate that by how many meetings you have. It doesn't matter if they're sales calls, it doesn't matter if they're staff meetings, doesn't matter if they're podcast interviews, it doesn't matter what they are. But if you try to have major blocks of creative time and intermittently have these appointments, or even half and half, he would not, some people would not advise you to do that. They would say the creative process of whatever it is that you're doing, whatever the project is, it could be that you're writing your own standard operating procedures, right? It doesn't even have to be a book,
Yeah.
but you need chunks of time for that. So that would be a major piece of advice I'd give people, is I would say, start practicing writing. And it might be that you decide, I'm going to discipline myself in this schedule so that I'm writing blogs, or I'm working on the table of contents, or I'm jotting ideas. But it's like creativity begets more creativity. And so you have to understand that you're going to have to dedicate big chunks and decide this is the key project I'm going to work on. It's not something that is very easily going to be squeezed into an already busy life. So now I think that way. Now I think October's major project is X. April's
Yeah.
major project is X. I am going to give 80% of my attention to this thing, which is why I think that when I'm ready to do revisions to How Good Humans Sell, or my next book, which I have an idea about, which I'm sure we'll be discussing, when I do that, I think that'll be the main thing I'll be doing. And
Yeah.
I know that if a person has a corporate job or other situations, not everyone has the privilege of being able to control their schedule that much, but many can and just won't.
Yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, I think it's a big deal to think of yourself as a client when it comes to a project like that so that you allocate the time it needs to get it done because the
Exactly.
rewards are so big on the other side, which we can talk about
Exactly.
next because I think, you start with, I know you wanted to use it in training, but then it took on a life of its own.
It did.
And
It did.
it did become more speaking engagements, but it also became conferences of your own.
It did.
And it became a whole Good Humans Growth Network initiative. So, geez,
It
I mean,
did.
just walk us through kind of the thread of what changed after you got it written.
So I think that even when I first did the book, so we launched that in the middle of 2021. There was a summer conference, and we got it launched right before that. So it launched in the middle of 2021. At the time of this recording, it's fall of 24. So it was 3 years ago now. And I because I am a trained seller, one thing that I do think I did really well, this part was a lot of work, but it wasn't difficult for me. Like I understood what would be involved and I knew the tasks to go through. I understood that if I was 100% self-publishing, so we only published on Amazon to begin with. I think it's now on a few other platforms, but it was completely self-published, did not have someone helping me promote it apart from me and my team. We did a launch party and I set some goals for myself about who I was going to reach out about having it. And we did a lot of posts and a lot of press and a lot of email about it. So, I mean, even to the point where you think I feel bad talking about this, but the way the algorithms work and the way email marketing works is like other people didn't get sick of it. I got sick of it. I got a little worried that it was saturating, but then I would have someone a year after it came out who would come and say, why aren't you talking about this amazing book as much as anymore? Like it was new to them, even though it
Yeah.
wasn't me. And that was this major realization that I needed to just keep going because presumably your network's always adding more people and it's new to them. And so there were some great lessons around that, but understanding that this thing is not just going to sell because you put it on Amazon. I mean, you are going to have to promote it and you're going to have to build a whole project plan around how to promote it. So I think we did really well with that. I mean, again, there's things I would do even better next time, but I applied everything I'd learned about corporate sales. I was like, you are going to have to talk about the value proposition about why people need this and why there's a need for one more sales book in the world. And you're going to have to tell that story over and over and over and over and over again. So that I think we did well. What I couldn't have anticipated that led to some things next was I did come to be in love with the title. I mean, I struggled with the title. I consulted with a
Yeah.
number of people about different ideas about it. And I just laughed thinking about all the different directions it took. But we landed on this. And it was this idea of this phrase, good humans, because part of what we talk about in the book is how people make up stories and they don't really understand how they're perceived by others. They're anxious about how they're perceived. So they under ask. And I give you steps to overcome that so that you will actually sell your product and service with more confidence. And so the fear of not being seen as a good human is one of the things that hold people back. So we decided, well, we'll call it How Good Humans Sell. Well, people just grabbed onto that phrase, good human. And I went out and I was like, can you trademark the phrase good human? The answer is no, not exactly, not just that phrase. But people, it's an aspirational identity that people want to be seen that way, at least non-narcissistic. Good people. Most people want to be seen that way. I
Most
think
good humans want to be seen.
exactly. So that that kind of spurred ideas for me. So as I used it, so yes, people would contact me and I would get to put it in chairs because, when I applied for keynote positions, I used it over and over again as a reference guide in my own training. So literally I might be teaching a concept and all the members of my class have been mailed a book. And so I'd say, open up your book to page 113 and you'll see this in the book, and they would have it on their desk. So I used it in all those different ways. It would pop up. Marketing, people just find it now, buy it, contact me and say, it was so great. Thank you to help me change my life. That's amazing. But the theme of the name carried forth. And so about 18 months after I published it, because I've always been an entrepreneur, I have always looked for different sources of lead generation. And then as a sales trainer, I'm very familiar with cold calling. I'd become trained and familiar with email marketing. But what had continued to be true, Elaine, was that in most people's experience, referrals are their very, very best lead they can get, because when someone else can explain what you do on your behalf, you get to borrow their trust, and then you have a 50 to 90% chance of winning that work. And so about 18 months after the launch of the book, I started building my own business to business referral ecosystem. And I carried that name Good Humans forward because I realized people feel the same way about networking as they feel about sales. They think it can feel transactional. A lot of people feel reluctant. And so we called it the Good Humans Growth Network because I'm addicted to this idea of growth. And the name Good Humans had already done well. And so then we just stuck with the blue and white, stuck with Good Humans. And now that is a resource that we always have a book table. I give it to members as, one of many things they get when we get together. And it's continued to be a tool that served them, because what good is a referral if you can't close it? And so I still love having this book as a resource to give people so that they can utilize the referrals they're given and still learn to be better sellers, because most people need to learn to be better sellers. That's been my
Yeah.
experience.
Let me jump in for a sec because I can tell you from experience. So, first of all, the book is a mindset changer. It really helps you shift toward being somebody who is genuinely curious, wants to know what people need, and doesn't sell in the arm twisting style of sales, which is what everybody thinks of.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I found the book valuable. But then I think even more so as this morphed into the groups. So now you have several groups that are underneath the Good Humans Growth Network.
Mm-hmm.
They're all and they're typically networking groups, but you had to help me understand the difference between the traditional. In fact, we were just, exchanging texts and a LinkedIn post this
Yes.
week
Yeah.
about that, because the difference being that most people think networking is the place you walk into the room and you start pitching people.
Yes.
And nobody wants that. Nobody
Yeah.
wants that, which is, of course, why I never wanted to go. And
Because you were paying attention
instead,
to what was happening.
yeah, and
Yeah.
instead, if you start to think of it as building your referral network, because if you think about it, most people will say, "Oh, I get referrals all the time," or "I get referrals," but they're random and they're
Mm-hmm.
out of the blue and there is zero plan behind it. So you can't
Yes.
count on that for your livelihood if that's all you're doing. But if you're part of this growth network and you get to know people really well, and now you're just recommending friends, well, that's a whole different way of thinking. And I
Yeah.
think that that is part of, if I keep trying to put my finger on what has evolved since you've been working on this, and just for me personally, I think that's it. It's
Mm.
the perception of what it means to have a referral partner and to get to know somebody because we genuinely want to support each other's businesses in the long run.
And thank you, Elaine, for that. And I would also add that I didn't even know when I finished How Good Humans Sell that I would build the network. That came to
Right.
me 18 months later. I was working with a coach at the time for the first time for myself. I made a big investment in buying several months of coaching because I was at a point in my career where I was literally saying, what do I want to do next? I could just feel everybody was post-COVID, right? Just kind of
Yeah.
like what's happening next. And I was trying to decide how I wanted to evolve. Did I want to go back to corporate? Am I going to stay an entrepreneur? What was I going to do? And one of the things that I could never have imagined and has become true is that the way that the sales training in the book and then my next venture fed one another, I could never have even probably planned that
Yeah.
as well as I didn't think to plan it as well as it's ended up working out, because going back to some of the lessons of the book, one of the things that people often don't think of, but once you illuminate this idea for them, like, oh my gosh, this just changes everything about my sales calls, is they are afraid to disqualify someone out of the process too early, right?
Mm,
Especially if you're some kind of consultant. If the truth is, you could morph your offer a little bit or lower your price or shorten your time frame or whatever the thing is that the buyer wants you to do, because you often have that kind of flexibility if you're self-employed. You are reluctant to cut people off and say, I think that we should talk again when you're ready, i.e., you're not ready to spend, right? Or you're not ready to do the work. But if you have someone to send them to, because you actually are even friends with friendly competitors, people who overlap or do things kind of like you, but not exactly like you, if you build a network of those people, it's so interesting to me that yes, it's others focused, and yes, you want to go first in those relationships and be a good giver, because then in reciprocity, they'll be a good giver to you, and you have this whole virtuous circle. On top of that, think about how if you have someone to send people to, when you get to that qualifying part of the sales process, which we talk about in the book, there's usually three things that are going to happen. The person either really is very interested and you're glad you spoke to them, but it's not quite time. And in that case, you want to say, well, it's a marketing lead. And so you want to say, okay, self, what can I do to give them things that help them, but also keep me from taking calls with people who aren't quite ready,
yeah.
right? So that's something you want to learn. But they'll probably come back, right? So that's a marketing lead. The next is we're going to schedule the next step because this really is the right time, right person, right buyer, right issue. And then the third is, I'm glad I met you. And now that we understand one another better, I see that I'm not the right person to help you at this moment. Well, what are you going to do when that happens?
Yeah.
And most people just say, I can't help you. And they just say that as graciously as they can. And then they go about their day. If you have someone who charges less than you, if you have someone who comes before you in what a buyer typically buys, if you have alternatives, literally competitive alternatives, well, you might think you need sales training, but actually, what if you were to create an automation and improve your website first, right? That would be an
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
where maybe they should do something else instead. And you see why they came to you, but now that you learn more, you actually have a different recommendation for them. If you have people to help you with that, it goes so much better. So again, being able to have those skills to have those kind of conversations are the sorts of things we talked about in the book. And then my ecosystem now gets to benefit from that because I am in a position to help people meet other people so that when they're in the own selling situation, they have an answer to the if it's not me, who is it question. And
Yes.
that is incredibly gratifying. I have to say, I did not dream that up 4 years ago when I started writing the book, but I'm so grateful about how that's evolved because it gives me more confidence as a seller to feel like everything that is going to happen here is going to be good for someone in some way. And it just makes me enter my calls totally differently.
It's the kindest possible thing you could do for your customer, your prospect, is to not leave them starting from scratch. If you've spent the time to get to understand them and know what they need, then if you know somebody who's trustworthy and can be part of that solution, so much better.
I know. I know. And
Yeah.
then because I'm a seller at heart, it just like makes my heart so happy when I hear stories of people who met because of an event we did or met
Yeah.
because two different networking communities inside the ecosystem had a virtual social, and they connected and then they learned, oh, I've been wanting to write a book, or, oh, I need a fractional CFO or whatever
Yeah.
that thing is. And then I hear that that connection was made and that solved a need for both of them. It's just incredibly gratifying.
Well, let me ask you this, because you and I have both kind of geeked out on Dr. Benjamin Hardy's book 10X is easier than 2X. And I love all the concepts. And maybe we'll do a whole separate discussion episode on that because
I'd love that.
we could spend the rest of the afternoon. But I was just curious, knowing what you know now, having started with the book, gone to establishing the Good Humans Growth Network, seeing all the different networks kind of populating underneath that umbrella, and then finally launching these conferences. Is it your opinion that somebody could 10X their business with a book?
Yes. Yes. And I would say the answer is two things. I would say yes and maybe. And the yes is absolutely 100% part of why I am having the ridiculous success that I'm having and having people want to build referral communities inside my ecosystem. Part of why I'm having that remarkable success is because in Dr. Benjamin Hardy's words, he would say, I'm waking up every day and making decisions about what my future self would do because I am doing the exercises of realizing how I'm not the person I was last week, last month, 1 year ago, or 4 years ago. So because I've changed, and part of why I changed was because of the exercise of writing the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Part of because of how I'm different makes that possible because of the way my identity and the way I run my schedule has changed. So that's the absolutely part. The maybe answer is yes, writing a book can help you 10x your future as long as you know what you want. You have to know what you want and you have to be willing to do the work. If you go to all the trouble to write a book and you won't sell it and you won't promote it and you won't promote yourself as the creator of that and as a guide in whatever the topic is that you're bringing into the world, if you won't do the work of really owning that, then you're going to go to the time and expense of creating something that is not going to end up being the tool for the life that you want because you weren't clear. So I think that in my experience, it absolutely has. And Elaine, I feel so lucky because I fell into sales after college. I mean, I know most people don't wake up and decide, I want to be a seller. I fell into it via recruiting. And I could just tell, even when I went to that very first sales conference when it was newly off the press and posted on Amazon, I went around and talked to people, and some people who had paid to be sponsors, some of them I knew, and they were famous in my worlds because they had promoted their book, and others had paid to be a sponsor and they were hoping that book would sell itself, and I didn't know them. I literally didn't know them. And we all were similar in that we all had books on Amazon. So you still have to do the things to get that outcome that you want. Yeah. And I think a book can be a key tool in that if you're willing to do the work.
Awesome. That's exactly what I think. And that's, my mind goes to all the technical checklist items. And you're right. You have to be willing to go on the podcasts, to ask for the speaking engagements, to be out there. And that really sums it up. You have to be out there in order to receive the opportunities that make it possible to 10X your business.
And Elaine, let me give a specific number to people because they might say, oh, I could be on a few podcasts. In the first year after I wrote the book, I was on 40 podcasts. And some people probably say, I mean, if I did it again, I probably need to be on 60 or 100, right? Like it probably needs to be even more. But I was on 40, and you count the number of weeks in a year. I mean, that was more than one a week for many, many, many weeks. It was a lot of work to promote it, but I did have people read it, find me that way, join my training, come to conferences. So I share that number just to put that out there. And again, I have no idea what others do, but it wasn't 4.
I think that is so helpful to kind of clarify that, because I do think people would go, oh, I could do 5 or 6 or no.
And they're reluctant because I think people, because they're good humans, I think they really do think I can't possibly post another thing on LinkedIn about another podcast I was on. People are going to be sick of me. But no matter how hard we work, we really can't totally game the algorithm. And
Yeah.
there are people that you want to have see it who won't see it, and people who you don't expect to see it. And you really cannot control that. So you do have to play a volume game because you only have some agency, and that agency is over what you can control, but there's
Yeah.
some things you can't. So you want to do everything you can to manage the ones you can.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. I always like to give people one task, one takeaway. So if there's the one thing that they could do today that will make a difference, and it doesn't have to be with writing a book, it's like just from you to them. What is the
Mm.
one thing they should do today that will make a difference in their business?
Mm. I'm going to say back to that thing that I learned earlier from the Alex Hormozy podcast. So for people
Mhm.
for clarity, his podcast is called The Game, and I just follow him around. He's a prolific content creator. So just jump in the stream. You can't possibly catch up on all the episodes. I mean, there's so many, but he is the one that I got the phrase maker time and manager time from.
Mhm.
And I think owning the fact that if you are going to write about anything, or you are going to program, or you are going to create programs in the world, or curriculum, or products, anything that you invent, you are a maker. And so learning to manage yourself and your own day so that you leave big chunks of time, big chunks being several hours at a time, not one, big chunks of time to work on the thing, the project. If you begin to manage yourself that way, so you stack your meetings on other days and allow for large chunks of maker time, it'll change your life, because all these projects that you are doing 1 hour here, half an hour here, half an hour here, it
Mhm.
takes too long. It's very discouraging to juggle so many things. And that is how I wrote my first book. I did not dedicate big enough chunks. And that is what I will never do again, because now I understand the difference between maker time and manager time. And I think if a person gets that concept, their self-management will propel them so much into this, desirable future self that they're becoming. I think it's a really key part.
I think you're right. That's a great place to start. All right, tell me how people can find you.
Thank you. Probably LinkedIn is the very best, because I do have several brands associated with me. I mean, you can go to howgoodhumansell.com. That's a website that has my speaker role, and it has links to Amazon and things like that. But if you go to LinkedIn and you type Catherine Brown, Catherine with a C, B2B referrals, B, the number two, B referrals. That's how you'll get to me, because there's a lot of Catherine Browns in the world. So go to Catherine Brown, B2B referrals, and I come up, and I really do follow people, create lead lists so I can keep up with people's posts that I want to care about and support. So it's actually a great place to connect with me.
All right. Well, we'll let everybody start there, but I'll be sure and post all the links in the show notes and on the blog. Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, I know that there are some people in the universe that would write a book completely by themselves without a guide, but I don't know why a person would do that. So Elaine did not ask me to do this. I'm going to give a big plug and say, you need a guide. I mean, you need a guide, because just like anything else, you don't know if you've never done it before, you don't know what questions to ask. And the problem is that by definition, we don't know what we don't know. So I think that whether it's starting out with outlines or a course or any of Elaine's materials, I would follow her, and I would consider some measure of help, because whatever you invest financially, you will save in so much time because of the clarity you'll gain. And again, you heard me say at the beginning, I stumbled around for a while because I wasn't completely sure what I wanted. And in some ways didn't find the right person that helped me capture my voice quick enough. There were just some things that I stumbled on the first time, and I won't make those mistakes again, because I have I have the right resources in front of me. So I would encourage people to continue to listen to you and to get the resources that you share, because it's going to help them in their journey.
Thank you so much for that. I was not expecting that, but I've
You're
got to
welcome.
receive all the warm words. I have on my word nerd shirt if you're listening to this on the podcast. So I'm feeling it today. And we're getting ready, just FYI, we are getting ready to launch a course around that. So we'll hopefully make that affordable and easy for people in the very near future. All right.
Why learn things the hard way? Why
Oh,
learn?
goodness me.
Mm-mm.
Too long. Not enough hours in the world to learn all the things if you start from
Exactly.
scratch.
Exactly. Exactly.
Thank
Exactly.
you,
Well, thanks.
Catherine. I'm
Yeah, thanks
so
for this
happy you were
opportunity.
here. And I
My
love
pleasure.
every conversation with you. And oh, before we leave, I want to mention that Catherine does have another conference coming up, and I will also be posting details about that because if you are a good human and you want to take part in that conference, you will meet a ton of other people who are outstanding referral partners. It's a warm and welcoming space. It's not intimidating, and I can't wait for the next one.
I'm really excited. I'm already thinking about all kinds of things about it. So, yes, please follow me and you can get on the mailing list to hear all the details. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.